If your wedding dreams involve the four-legged love of your life as well as the human one, then this is a must-listen episode for you. From cat ring bearers to flower dogs and other adorable options, the possibilities are endless. However, involving your pets in your big day requires careful planning and consideration to make it positively memorable instead of a viral YouTube disaster. In this episode of Starlight Pet Talk, we'll cover everything you need to know to ensure a seamless and joyful experience for everyone involved. Stay tuned. You're listening to Starlight Pet Talk, a podcast for pet parents who want the best pet care advice from cat experts, dog trainers, veterinarians, and other top pet professionals who will help you live your very best life with your pets. Welcome to Starlight Pet Talk. I'm your host, Amy Castro, and today we're going to talk about weddings. Now, I must admit up front, I had a very low-key Justice of the Peace wedding, so the thought of having pets along was not even on my radar back when I got married, but it definitely is on people's radar today, and we want to make sure that we're doing things to make sure that your day turns into something that is positively memorable, and like I said in my teaser, doesn't turn into a YouTube disaster video. My guest today is Nicole Ettenhofer, the VP of Growth and Strategy for George Street Photo and Video, a national wedding photo and video company. With more than a decade of experience in the wedding industry, Nicole is a recognized expert in wedding trends and couples photography. She lives near Denver, Colorado with her husband and 2 dogs and is an avid hiking enthusiast. So Nicole, thank you so much for being here today to talk about this super exciting subject. I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Amy, for having me, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I think, we see so many disaster videos on YouTube, and as much as the train wreck might be fun to watch as an outsider, I know it cannot possibly be fun for a couple that has spent months or sometimes years not only planning, but dreaming of what their wedding is going to be like. So I appreciate you being here to talk about the things that we can do to incorporate pets, because they are seen more and more these days as family members beyond what they might have been perceived years and years ago. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to ask, what do you think pet parents need to consider before they even get to that point, whether a pet should be involved in their wedding ceremony at all or not?
Thank you, Amy. That's a great question. The first thing to think about is knowing your pet. So how well does your pet do in public? How comfortable is your pet with crowds? This will probably be the first time a pet is at a large event. So keeping all of that in mind, what are their behaviors? How well trained are they? And then also as a couple, how comfortable are you with the possibility of your pet stealing the show or not following your perfect instructions, because that will happen. And so keeping those things in mind. But as long as you know your pet and they're comfortable with crowds and you feel comfortable with mistakes happening, then I would say go ahead and go for it. In addition to that, though, you must make sure your venue is okay with a pet. Not every venue will allow pets, but if you're having an outdoor wedding, that will allow you the opportunity to have a little bit more flexibility with that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think that point about having your pet in crowds, it kind of reminds me of my daughter when she was little. She was always pretty well behaved and pretty reasonable, even as a small child. But you take her to a birthday party and she would act very inappropriately, like either just not participating or just being a brat. And it's like, where's this coming from? But it's, in different environments, people are going to act differently, and so are animals. And so even I would think the most calm dog who might be really super calm at home could be a wedding destroyer in a large group. So that's such a good point to bring up. I had mentioned in the teaser, I envisioned, okay, I can see a cat or a dog being a ring bearer, going down the aisle. And I think I've seen that before, or a flower girl or flower boy. But what are some of the other roles or capacities that pets can perform to be part of a wedding ceremony?
What you mentioned is the most common, but what we have seen in addition to that is many times it'll be the dog of honor. So, not just one of the bridesmaids or the groomsmen, but actually the dog of honor. We have also seen where the pets, and in times it might be multiple pets, will actually walk the bride or the groom down the aisle. We have seen them be part of the wedding where they're just part of the actual party itself, or they have a dedicated area near the ceremony. Many people like to dress up their pets. So, we can talk a little bit about thinking that through ahead of time, if that's appropriate for your pet. but we've seen them with little dresses, bows, tuxedos. They'll do a pre-entry of the bride at times, and it will say, here comes my mom. It does make for adorable photos.
I bet it makes some fabulous photos. And for some reason, I had this bizarre thought that came into my head when I was writing the teaser. It's like a ring-bearing tortoise, and how tedious that would be, like watching this tortoise take its time coming down the aisle with the rings on its shell. But I do want to talk about the clothes, because I took my dog to an event one time, and it was a Halloween event, put her in this witch costume, and she was just obsessed with messing with the hat and getting it off her head. So no good photos came out of that thing. It was kind of a waste of effort. So how do you figure out what's the right job for your pet, if you want to call it a job, during the wedding?
Well, many practice runs. So if your dog isn't used to wearing outfits, test them out at home, and then also take them out in public with it. How do they react? Because what I've noticed, even with my own dogs, they'll be fine with like a coat when it's cold outside in the house. But as soon as we go outside and they see another animal or another human, all of a sudden they start to be a little bit more reactive. So, take them around a park with the outfit, have them try it on, have them get comfortable with the outfit ahead of time. With signage, you can always dedicate a time pre or post the ceremony or the reception where you could take some photos with the signage so that your pet is more comfortable in that moment. But if you are dedicated to having them walk down the aisle or actually hold that, sign for the entire ceremony, keep that in mind. How large is your pet? How heavy is the sign? Having somebody take off the sign after you have that photo opportunity. Always be mindful of your animal.
Yeah. And I would think, that whole idea of how much can they tolerate kind of brings me to, if you do figure out that your pet is a good fit for being involved on the big day, how do you determine how long? Like, are most people bringing their pets from the time that they're doing their hair and getting dressed till the end of the dancing at night? Or are they having pets show up for a little window of opportunity? Or how are people generally managing that?
In general, Amy, they will have a moment of time. So that might be for a segment of the ceremony, the whole ceremony, depending on your pet. If they're less comfortable being around larger crowds, the getting ready is a perfect opportunity to have your pet be there. Wonderful photo opportunities. So I do recommend making sure, maybe they make multiple appearances, but within that time, that they have a dedicated space for themselves. If they have a pet crate or a bed or a blanket, making sure that they feel comfortable when they're not with you during that, but definitely, short segments of time. So that way it sets everyone up for success.
Yeah, definitely. And so all of those things that you mentioned, in addition to the trying the clothes on in advance, getting them out in public in advance, there's got to be a lot of preparation that goes into it. What would be some of the things, and maybe not an exact timeline, but you certainly don't want to be thinking about this at the rehearsal and springing this on the dog all then. How can we prepare our pets for this big day?
Amy, a couple of recommendations for that with the preparation is to make sure you're bringing them outside with people. You can bring them to restaurants and so forth. Doing that ahead of time. That could be 6 months ahead of time, getting them prepared. Having a party at your house. How are they with people? If you haven't had that opportunity in the past, bringing them to other events, for short periods of time to see how they are. So that way you really understand their behaviors and what you are setting them up for the day and what you're setting yourself up for that day. And then in addition to that, with preparations, making sure you have a human companion for your pet that day or a handler, having someone who is going to be fully responsible to tending to your pet or your pets that entire day, whatever that looks like. So if you can't afford it, I highly recommend to have a professional, someone who is their pet sitter or dog walker, somebody they know, because that person is going to make sure that throughout the day they're coming in and out. They are fed. They have the treats. They bring them to their comfortable place when they are not, at the actual party itself. So having that person be there for your pet or pets so that you don't have to worry about that on your wedding day, because you have so many other things going on and you don't want to have to worry about your dog, So I highly recommend that. And then in addition to that, if you can't afford a professional, you can ask a friend, a family member, but making sure that they understand that they are also going to be in and out of the entire day as well, so that they know that they might have to leave the ceremony. They may have to leave the reception early or do introductions of the pet and so forth. So setting them up for success by really making sure that the responsibilities are clear.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point because I just think about situations where we're doing rescue events and some people just are not intuitive dog handlers. They don't have experience. Maybe they don't have the strength to manage a larger dog. And certainly not somebody I would assume that's actively involved in the wedding party. So you need to find that cousin who you don't like quite as much, maybe. No, I'm just kidding. But I love the idea of hiring a professional, like hire your dog trainer if you've got one that you actively work with, or shoot, I would think you could reach out to rescue groups and see if they've got somebody that maybe needs to make a little extra money that's a volunteer, but might want to make some money just handling the dog for a few hours because they've got that dog handling experience. So yeah, all good advice. You'd mentioned several things like their crate, their blankets. What would be some other good things to have in their go bag, for lack of a better term?
I love the term go bag. Making sure that you have both high value treats and just general treats. My dogs love hot dogs. So if I'm going to have a high value treat for them, I'll cut up hot dogs into tiny little pieces, have them in a container with me. Because if you do want your dog to be part of the photos, making sure that they have something that they're going to have a positive reaction with. So that will give something for the photographer to hold or your handler to hold and, near the camera so that they're looking at the camera, that you'll be able to get them to do the poses that you want them to do. And another great way to bring in your dog is with the engagement photos as well, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the engagement photos, that could be another time to prepare your pet. Also, too, with those high value treats and having a go bag for that. So if your dog has favorite toys, making sure that you're bringing the toys. I don't know if you're familiar with those lick mats that they have for pets that help to keep them. I love them, use them every day. They are so great. So having some of those prepared ahead of time, and that way your dog could be tended to however that is. If it's going to be a hot day, a frozen treat for them is also good to help to keep them cool. So being mindful of, what is their environment going to be? What will they need? What do they like to have at home? What are the go-to things? And making sure you have all of that ready for them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Choosing a wedding photographer that specializes in working with animals, is that a thing? I mean, obviously you do that, at your company. Is that something I should specifically ask for, I guess?
You should definitely make sure that your photographer is okay with dogs, letting them know up front, I am going to be bringing my dog, my cat, my pets. Are you okay with that? So that should definitely be a clarifying question. At George Street Photo and Video, we always ask our talent members if they're comfortable with pets. And so we know that up front, and we will make sure that we align someone with a photographer who loves pets. Many do, but don't make the assumption that they do. So definitely ask those questions ahead of time.
Good point. And even if they like pets, it's what kind of pet are you bringing? That could make a factor. Somebody might be okay with smaller dogs, but not be as comfortable with larger dogs, things like that.
Exactly. As part of the planning process too, if you have a somewhat of an idea of how your pet is going to be included, that also would be good to give your photographer up front. And you may not know all the plans, but you may say, I'm only going to have them in the ceremony, or it will only be for an hour during the getting ready, or they're going to be there all day and throughout the entire reception. And so that way, all of your talent members and every professional you're working with also understands what they're going to be working with that day.
Yeah, good point, because you don't want them to miss a window of opportunity if it's going to be a relatively small one for certain pets, for sure. And I would think the weather is going to be a huge factor. Like I think about my bulldog would be a terrible wedding guest because she never calms down. She would just be way too excited. But also the idea of heat and things like that. No dog should be out for long, long periods of time, but she's especially sensitive to heat and getting overheated. So something to definitely consider along the way.
Absolutely. It's very important to be mindful of the entire environment. Is your dog afraid of thunderstorms? There could be a thunderstorm. So keeping all of that in mind to plan and prepare for alternatives on the day.
Yeah. So Nicole, it sounds like there's a lot of planning that goes into it. It's making me anxious thinking about it already. But I think, like you're saying, if you're planning well enough in advance and we have strategy and support, it sounds like that's going to go a long way. Are there any other success tips that you would share as far, like I was thinking about transporting the pet, how is the pet getting there? I would assume from the handler, but
definitely transportation should be kept in mind, especially if most people do multiple locations. They may have their ceremony at one location, they may take photos at another, and then they head to the reception, and then sometimes there's an after party. So, making sure that your handler or the human companion is going to be able to help support the dog with transportation. Everything to keep in mind. How do you transport your dog? Do they feel comfortable in a car? Do they feel comfortable in a stranger's car? Again, all these things that you can do ahead of time to make sure that they feel comfortable. I have a 12-year-old pitty mix, and she needs a ramp to get into the car. So again, or seatbelts or crates, like making sure that, does the crate fit in the car that the pet's going to be going into for that day? So planning all of that ahead of time, so that you don't need to worry about that on the day of, because there are so many other things to be worried about on the day of. So handling and preparing ahead. I mentioned the engagement session, Amy.
Yes.
I really recommend making sure that you do an engagement session or even some type of brief photo session. There might be an additional fee for that with your photographer, but usually they're at an affordable price if you are going to also have the wedding as part of your photography. This will give you and your pet and your photographer all a chance to have a practice run. So you're going to have wonderful photos too. It gives an opportunity. Usually there's 60 to 90 minutes where how does your dog do in that time? Are they okay in front of the camera? You'll then know, does your dog prefer those high value treats or the toy for the camera? So that also is a great way to help prepare you for having your pet on your wedding day.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And so it's just a much lower key environment. And, at least if all else fails and you decide either at the last minute, this isn't going to work to have the pet there, your handler drops out, whatever happens that you end up not having your pet there the day of, at least you still have those photos as part of the, remembrance of the big event.
Absolutely. And then, as far as preparation is concerned too, I also recommend being willing to think through all the alternatives that you can do. So if you want to have your pet included, and I'll share my personal story about this a little bit later, but what you want to keep in mind is if your pet is unable to be there, there are alternatives. You could have photos of your pet saying, sorry, I couldn't be here today, and you could use those engagement photos as part of that. You could also have a signature cocktail. I just saw some photos today that were so cute. It was like Marty the Martini. So they did a martini photo of, and it had the pet in front of it. And so you can do signature cocktails or signature mocktails. Instead of party favors or a gift, you could also, contribute to a local animal shelter or any kind of pet charity of your choice on behalf of your pet. So there are ways to bring your pet in, even when they can't be there in real life.
That's a good point. It's still a way to recognize them and the importance and their role in your family. That's great. So assuming I have a good plan in place and I'm following the plan, is there any other advice for at the big day, or maybe even better than advice would be other stories you want to share as far as things that you've seen be super successful, or maybe something that didn't work out as well because it wasn't well planned, or both?
Some of the things to remember is your dog will very likely steal the show and they may not follow your directions. And so you have to be really open to that. So I've seen where they've been with maybe the mom. This is just an example, but in this case, they were with the mom all day and they were so excited to see the dad that they took off running down the aisle toward the dad, because they were so excited, like, oh, I haven't seen you all day. Here I am.
So no slow, dignified walk down the aisle like you were hoping for.
Yeah, exactly. And even though they rehearsed that, but it didn't work out as planned. We've seen where they're part of the flower girl team, but remember, children don't always have an easy time handling a dog. So we've seen it where, the dog is walking way too fast or walking way too slow. And so, the flower girls or the ring bearer trips up because of the pet isn't cooperating with the moment. I have seen where you have, beautiful train, you spent thousands of dollars on your wedding dress or hundreds of dollars on your wedding dress, and the dog walks up to the aisle. They walk up the aisle beautifully, and then they sit right on the train. And that's where they're going to be the entire time with a little bit of muddy paws. So again, all things to keep in mind. Your pet may jump up. Another fun story that I've seen is, the dog was being well behaved, and then all of a sudden, they were saying their vows. The dog jumped up, put the paws on the hands of the couple, and was just staring at them while they were doing their vows. Now, it was very sweet with photos. But the oohs and ahs weren't necessarily about the vows. They were about the pet, right? So it's, Again, just kind of keeping that all in mind that with all the best laid out plans, your pet is going to be a pet. That's the other thing too, is, we've seen engagement photos where the dog wasn't being, well behaved. So the couple took the dog for a walk, and from the distance, the photographer was taking shots. Well, some of the best amazing shots, because they were in the real moment.
Yeah. Real candid.
They're very candid, and it really shows the personality of the pet parents, the dog. It was really lovely. So remembering that it might not be perfect, but that also might make for the very best photos.
Yeah. And this goes back to a theme that we kind of have all the way through our podcast is, the whole thing about fit. You want your pet to be a right fit for you, but is your pet the right fit for this kind of environment based on what your expectations are? If you are expecting this perfect wedding where all eyes are on the couple and everything is going to go flawlessly, then you probably want to think about alternatives for your pet, even the most well-behaved pet, because like you said, the odds are they're going to become the focus of attention. You better have a sense of humor, I guess is what I'm saying, and be flexible.
Yes. Levity is key.
Yeah, sure.
And Amy, I'll share a little bit about my story. So when I was getting married, I had my Estelle. She was a 100-pound Rottweiler, and I adopted her when she was 6 years old. And at that point in time, she was 10. So she was a senior girl, very stubborn in her ways, very adorable. And I wanted her to be part of the wedding, but I had to make some really solid decisions because she was terrified of cameras. And we did get married outdoors in a prairie. And so I knew that I had to be very careful about the moments I chose to have her at my wedding. So what we did was we alternated where the photographer and videographer would be for the day based on where Estelle was going to be. We lived in Chicago at the time, and we got married in Wisconsin. So we wanted to make sure that she was comfortable for the day. And so I wanted her to come in and do her own appearance. And I had a cute little bow that matched my dress. It was very adorable. We had 2 photographers and we had a videographer. We asked them to please sit during dinner, eat, and please keep your cameras away. And we asked everybody, please keep your phones down when Estelle comes in. And so we had somebody do an announcement, the DJ do an announcement ahead of time saying, Estelle is entering, please everyone put everything down. And we had her go around and make an appearance. And she said hi to all of the people she knew. And then we had her leave. But the other wonderful thing, when I was saying taking photos from afar, because she was terrified of cameras and videos and just even picking up the iPhone, she was terrified of it. We did have our videographer, sneak a clip of her, and it's the only video I have of her. So it's just a 10-second clip from afar. They zoomed in. And so I have her just laying there watching me while I'm getting ready. And it was really lovely. It's worth it. But I had to be mindful of Estelle, what was right for her and what was right for us. And so it's really important to keep all of that in mind. And that is the reason why I'm so passionate about this subject, because you can make it work in one way or another, but just making sure your pet comes first.
We'll be right back.
Our pets aren't in our lives nearly long enough. So isn't it important that we build the best relationship with them that we can? Let us help. Get our exclusive guide, 10 Tips for Building a Lifelong Bond with Your Pet, and start transforming your relationship today. Just go to petparenthotline.com/bond with your pet. Yeah, definitely. It got me thinking about, AI and the ability that we have these days to manipulate photographs. Do people sometimes do that where they, put in the picture of the pet after the fact? And then my second part of that question is kind of like, on one hand, I could say, oh, how cute. I now have a photograph of that. But if it never really actually happened, do I have a memory that goes with that photograph, or is it just a photograph? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question, Amy. We've seen people ask to have photos included of their pet, maybe at the rehearsal dinner where they didn't have our professional photographer there. Mm-hmm. So we've had that, but we haven't really had many requests where they ask us to actually bring in their pet after the fact. But asking to add photos to their photo album is what we've seen.
Okay. So you had mentioned some alternatives like the engagement photo shoot, and I think that's a fantastic idea to do that. But are there any other alternatives? If I just determine, for whatever reason, my pet's not going to be there on the actual day itself, what are other options to still include the pet in the whole event, I guess?
So, there are so many ways you can do it. We've seen wonderful tables where they might have like a little go bag that's on behalf of the pet. We've seen it where, it will say choose a seat. And that also might be with the photo of the pet. So the pet's being the host without being there, welcoming everybody to the ceremony location. I'd mentioned the cocktails and mocktails previously. The donations are also lovely too. So there's just a variety of ways, like what matters to you? What matters to your pet? How do you want your pet to be represented? Whatever you wish and dream of, you can do. We see more and more that the pet is included one way or another, whether it's in real life or a representation, something on behalf of the pet. Oh, also cake toppers, I forgot to mention. They actually may have figurines or photos of their pet, and that has been really neat to see.
Yeah, that would be super cute, and something that you've got as a keepsake after the fact. It also got me thinking, what about pets that have passed away? I would think that if you as a couple had this pet and, the pet didn't make it to the point where you got married, some of these options like the cocktail or the cake topper or whatever it might be another way to remember the pet and also have the pet involved. Have you seen that at all?
We have seen that. So many people will do tables where they have like, in memory of. Mm-hmm. Or seats in memory of. And so we've seen the pet be included as part of that. So, and then also the donation we've seen too. So they're making a donation on behalf of the pet and, everyone is aware of that with a little token from the pet. But the memory table is really lovely.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So the other thing this gets me thinking about, Nicole, and maybe you've seen this as well, is that beyond weddings, there are a lot of other big milestones that we have in our lives. It got me thinking about baby showers or a baby coming home or even funerals and involving pets. We just did an episode on, what happens after your pet dies. And if people are having remembrance ceremonies, parties, funerals for their pets, the pet being involved in a funeral doesn't seem so far-fetched. Are you seeing any of those types of things?
We have. We'll start with the celebrations first, and it's also celebration of life as well. I want to acknowledge that. But with parties and so forth, again, it's going back to the same concept of knowing your pet. How well does your pet do with people? Does the location allow for pets? So, bringing a child home or children home, that's a wonderful time to include the pet, but making sure that the introduction is, done properly. As far as funerals, I haven't personally seen that, but I've heard about it where, they will have as part of the memory table, the pet parent with the dog or the cat. I haven't actually heard of any at a funeral per se, but I have seen where there's representation of the pet.
Okay. I feel like pets have always been a part of our lives and the various stages of our lives, but I think the way that people are interacting with their pets and the way that they're thinking and feeling about their pets as a whole has changed significantly over the last couple of years. So I would guess that you're going to see more and more of these types of things as time goes on and as people maybe forego having human children and those pets are their children, their family. And so they would be included just like any other two-legger. So, Nicole, I am not a professional photographer. I'm going to tell you that right up front, but I do try to take a lot of pictures of pets in the rescue, and some of them are just great posers, and some of them are completely uncooperative, no matter how many pet wranglers you might have. What advice do you have there as far as prepping the pet for that and or getting that great shot because you've got your pet properly posed on the day of the event?
Absolutely. So I think, some of the things to keep in mind, Amy, is to have a dedicated time where you are going to take photos with your pet. So, wherever that is right for your day or ahead of your wedding as well. And so you'll want to make sure that you have a small number of people with you during that time. Make sure that your human companion or handler is there with you as well. You'll want to make sure you have, those high value treats, squeaky toys, whatever it is your dog likes. And then what you'll want to do is do some small group settings. So keep in mind, although well-posed dogs are wonderful, the candid moments of really showing the personality are what is absolutely delightful. So just allow for the moments where you're actually being you with your pet as a couple, as an individual. So you may take time to sit on the ground. If you like to play a little tug of war, maybe there's the rubbing of the belly or petting your pet. So whatever that might be, but what comes natural, because you will get some of the best shots. We've seen where the couple is, looking at their pet and their pet is gazing into their eyes, and you can see the love in that moment. So with pets, some of the very best images that you can capture are actually not pose shots. They're of a natural, organic moment. So take a walk with your dog in a little nature, in a park, and really allowing the photographer to just get how you are interacting with your pets. And so those are also really lovely moments. And then, you could also give your pet a treat, play with the squeaky toy with your dog. So kind of getting some of those moments as well. And then when you do want to have those perfectly posed photos, you're going to want to make sure that toy or treat is available right there and then. Make sure that you allow for enough time, because it might take 20 tries in order to get that posed photo that you want. So allowing for that time and allowing, to do a variety of different shots and poses, but you may want to just start with, so that your dog can feel calmer and they can be more engaged with you. First, start with those candid shots. Just give your dog some attention, allow shots to come naturally, and then do a few post shots. And you may actually prefer the candid shots after all of that.
Yeah, after all said and done, it sometimes happens like that. And sometimes the most spontaneous ones, like you said, end up being the best ones. I would think also this is where the handler, having somebody that knows what they're doing, because one of the things that I have discovered just in doing rescue photos is that if you've got a squeaky toy and you've got a handler that doesn't realize that there's only going to be so much novelty in that squeaking. So if they're squeaking the heck out of it while the photographer is still getting the camera ready and hasn't even, aimed the camera yet, then the dog might lose interest before you even get that shot. So knowing exactly when and how to use it is important. So people need to take that into consideration when you're trying to get that pose, that just right pose or the head cock or whatever it might be that you're looking for. Do you find that to be the case as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in photography, timing is everything. And that's where you want to have the variety too, Amy, like you mentioned. Like, you might want to have a couple different squeaky toys, so that way after they're disengaged with one toy, you can bring in another toy. You might want to have a variety of different treats. I know that crinkles, like even having the bag, we'll do that a lot. You were mentioned about the cocked head. And so some of the cutest photos are where there's somebody behind the photographer with the toy, with the treat, with the crinkle bag. And so that the pet looks directly into the camera or has the head cocked or looking just to the side. That really captures a lovely photo as well. It's posed and candid simultaneously.
Yeah. It's going to be a group effort for sure. And I think that's so important. We have that help, because I think people think it's going to be easier. Like, I'm just going to sit there with my dog and I've got this person taking the photograph. But, having those extra people on hand, I think would just make the whole thing exponentially better, a better experience and easier to get those shots that you're looking for.
Absolutely. And I think too, in real life, Amy, as you're thinking about what you do to take photos of your dog, you're capturing those real life moments. You're doing more of the candid shots in general. So what do you like on your phone of your pet and how did you get those? So kind of being mindful of that. We tried to do a pose photo, my husband and I, with our two dogs, and both of us have, marketing and photography. So we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we had everything staged and set up, and it took us a good 2 hours just to get a single shot of having it posed, because, one would look one way, then another would look another way. Some of the non-pose photos are the ones that we like the best. I think we chose the one where one of the dogs jumped up and licked me in the face. And I was like, with my face. But it really just goes to prove that bringing out your dog's personality sometimes isn't going to come in those pose shots. It's going to be in those real life moments, candid moments that everyone loves.
Yeah. Well, and your personality too.
Absolutely.
It's like I see pictures of myself sometimes posed and it's like, yeah, that is the fake That's the I'm getting my picture taken smile, not the real one or whatever it might be. So they might be lovely, but they're not as you as they could be sometimes. So that's great advice. So, Nicole, obviously not having planned any kind of a real wedding, I have no idea about selecting venues or talking to venues, but, adding pets is a whole nother level of things. So are there some questions that you think we definitely need to ask to ensure that the venue is prepared for our pets and that we're prepared for the venue?
Yes, Amy, that's a great question. So you should really think about, first of all, you want to ask your venue, do you allow pets? And if they do allow pets, do you allow pets indoors, outdoors? Are there specific locations where you allow the pets? So sometimes a venue might not allow them inside, but they do allow them outside, or there might be a park nearby. So kind of asking them those types of questions and making sure that they also allow for photography in those areas too.
Good point.
If you're choosing to get married in a church, it's very likely that they do not allow pets. So you might want to ask in their location if they're not allowed inside, it's very uncommon for them to be allowed inside. Is there a space outside where you can take some of those photos, and making sure that on their property, it's okay to have pets, because just some, locations don't want pets at all. So,
right.
You have to really ask those questions. You also want to make sure that you know where the venue, and this is something you'll want to communicate with your human companion or your handler, you'll want to know where the dog should relieve themselves.
Oh, yeah. I've been thinking about that this whole episode. When you said something about the dog sitting on the train, my first thought was the dog walked up and lifted his leg on the train or something like that. It's like, ah.
And that could happen, but so you'll want to know, where are the best locations. And that way you're not in any type of misunderstanding on your wedding day. You have all of those questions answered ahead of time. So they may want you to take it down the street. So just really making sure that you fully understand every location your dog can be, having their comfortable zone. If they are going to be at the venue, is there a place where you can bring the crate or the bed or the blanket? Can there be a dedicated place for your pet? So being mindful and just making sure you have 100% clarity and 100% confirmation that everything is okay ahead of the wedding. So ask those questions before you book. If it's important that you want your dog there, make sure ahead of time you ask all of the questions every moment of when your dog is going to be there, so that you don't want to have a disappointment the day of. And that way it will help you prepare ahead of time.
Yeah. Not only disappointment, but then the logistics of, now what do I do?
Right.
Now that the dog is here, what do I do? And I think it's such a good point too, because even if you are having your ceremony and everything's going to be outdoors, I could see somebody easily assuming, well, it's outdoors. What does it matter? But it might matter to that venue. So you definitely want to check that out.
Absolutely. Even if it's a local park, make sure that you know if dogs are allowed, if pets are allowed.
Good point. And that's another thing. If you are going to a park or something like that does allow dog, you also want to take into consideration that there might be other people and other dogs. You're not going to, unless you're closing down the whole park, which generally doesn't happen. That's something else to plan for, is other animals being in the vicinity. So like I think about my Doberman Pinscher, who was very well-behaved dog, but not great with other dogs. I could see him definitely going from 0 to 60, from being very cooperative to non-cooperative, if other dogs were on site. So something to consider for sure.
Absolutely.
Nicole, I really appreciate all of this fantastic advice. How would somebody work with your company? Because it sounds like you've kind of got things in place to have pet-friendly photographers and obviously great wedding photos, because I've looked at your work on the websites and things like that. How would people get in touch with you? And where are you located around the country or around the world?
Thank you, Amy. So we are nationwide.
Okay, great.
So wherever you're getting married, we likely are. And then you can go to georgestreetphoto.com. That's our website. Recommend checking out our blog and our resource pages, because we do have, content on when you're bringing in your pet. And then, of course, we're on Instagram, and our handle is @GeorgeStreetPhoto.
Great. And, I'm sure people that are getting married know this, but how far in advance should I be contacting a wedding photographer to get this set up?
So we see couples reach out to us as far out as 18 months, but the more common is somewhere between 9 and 6 months out.
Okay. All right. I remember back in the day that, the venue was kind of the first thing to get that nailed down. So it sounds like the photographer is right up there with that to get that set in advance.
Yes, the natural sequence is the venue, then the dress, and then the photographer. The other thing to keep in mind is if you are very particular about your photographer, you're going to want to book early, especially if you're getting married during a peak wedding date. photographers book up quickly. So I highly recommend, booking early and making sure that you have all of the talent members that you want.
Great. Good advice. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your, personal experiences, your business smarts about this subject. And I really feel like you've given people some great advice to make sure that whatever they decide to do and however much they decide to involve their pet, that it's going to be a great success and they're going to have these photographs that preserve those memories for a lifetime.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Amy. I'm so happy to be here and help everyone who's out there getting married or having an event with their pet.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Starlight Pet Talk. Even if you're not planning a wedding, consider this as a possibility for, having your pets involved in other major life events. And please be sure to share this episode with anybody who who is planning a big event and would like to include their pets and is also looking for a fantastic photographer to chronicle those events. And we will see you next week. As we close out today's episode, I want to make sure that you realize that the journey doesn't end here. We have tons of information for you in our show notes, including additional resources, links that you can get further information, and sometimes we might even have some surprises there for you as well. Keep in mind, too, that our conversation is a two-way street. This is your show, too, and we want you to get involved. If you have questions stirring in your mind, ideas you're burning to share, or a story that you think the world needs to hear, don't keep it to yourself. Let us know about it. Your thoughts, your questions, and your ideas are the lifeblood of the show, and we cannot wait to hear them. You can find all the ways to contact us in the show notes or on our website. So don't be a stranger. Drop us a line, send us a note, send us a voicemail, get in touch on social media. Let's keep this conversation going and build a community that's driven by curiosity, empathy, understanding, and our shared love of pets. Don't forget to tune in next week and every week for a brand new episode of Starlight Pet Talk. And if you don't do anything else this week, give your pets a big hug from us.